Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time.
All right, today we're going to dig into a really fascinating system of invisible power, one that Christopher Hitchens lays out in his brilliant collection of essays, Unacknowledged Legislation. We're talking about how writers and literature act as this unseen force, shaping our society's moral rules. And why does this matter? Well, because this quiet force is what ultimately defines the very boundaries of our public debates. It sets the stage for everything else.
So let's just jump right in with a big question. Think about it. We know who writes our laws, right? You can point to politicians, to government buildings. It's pretty clear. But what about all those unspoken rules, the moral codes and social norms we actually live by every day? Who writes those?
You know, the official story is super straightforward. When we hear the word legislation, we think of a formal political process. It's about creating legally binding rules in Congress or Parliament. That's the version of power we all learn about in school.
But Hitchens asks us to look a little deeper, to see this really interesting contrast. On one side, yeah, you've got formal legislation. It's public, it's official, it comes from people we elect. But on the other side, there's what you might call cultural legislation. And this is a totally different beast. It's driven by unelected, independent voices. And while it isn't legally binding, its moral influence can be incredibly persuasive. And that right there, that brings us to his core idea. Hitchens argues there's this whole other kind of legislation happening all the time. It's unacknowledged, it's working in the background. And it's not wielded with a gavel in a courtroom, but with a pen.
So what is this system really? Well, unacknowledged legislation is basically the power writers have to shape our public conscience, to nudge our social norms, and even to expand what we think is politically possible. And the key thing is they do all of this without any formal authority. No official title, no badge, nothing.
What's absolutely fascinating is how Hitchens himself puts it. He says, think about those moments when all the politicians, all the parties are in complete agreement on something, when it seems like a done deal. He argues that it's often a single writer, an individual pen, that creates the moral breathing room for a real argument to even start. They literally introduced dissent where there was just silence.
And if you look back, history is just packed with examples of this system in action. I mean, think about Thomas Paine arguing for American independence when that was a completely radical, out-there idea. Or you've got Mark Twain taking on American imperialism. Fast forward a bit, and you have Norman Mailer just shattering the consensus around the Vietnam War. See, these writers weren't just commenting on events. They were actively changing the terms of the entire debate.
Okay, so if this system of unacknowledged legislation is real, how does it actually work? What are the mechanics behind it, the patterns? Let's break that down.
The first pattern is this almost natural impulse to challenge the consensus. It seems like writers are just wired to dissent. Hitchens gives the example of Jorge Luis Borges, who at first kind of made excuses for the military junta in Argentina, but in the end, his very identity as a writer, what Hitchens calls the ironic mind, it just couldn't stomach the brutal, literal dictates of the state. He had to speak out.
Next up is the way these writers draw the lines for our moral boundaries. Literature, he says, creates the needful moral legislation. It articulates arguments against injustice in a way that formal law often can't touch. He makes this amazing point. He says every legal argument against the death penalty has already been made. But society is still waiting for that one poem or that one novel that will truly legislate against it in our collective conscience. And the third pattern is this fascinating feedback loop. It's all about forging new language for new realities. So imagine this. The Hubble telescope sends back images of a universe that's bigger and weirder than we ever thought possible. Suddenly, our old words, our old metaphors, they just don't work anymore. It falls to the writer to invent the language we need to even begin to understand it.
Okay, to really wrap our heads around all this, it helps to have one single, powerful metaphor. Something that lets us see the shape of this invisible influence.
Let's think of it as a shadow legislature. Just picture it, running in parallel to our formal government. Now, this shadow legislature, it doesn't pass laws, it doesn't hold elections, but it is absolutely shaping public outcomes and our moral norms. And it operates entirely on the currency of persuasion, not political power. And that, of course, leads to a pretty provocative question, doesn't it? If this shadow legislature is constantly shaping the unwritten rules we live by, then where is power really located?
Is it only in the hands of the officials we can see, or is it also held by the authors on our shelves?
So the really crucial point here is what this new perspective reveals. Because once you see this system at play, it just fundamentally changes how you perceive the role of the written word in our society.
Using this framework, you start to see that literature isn't just art, and it's not just entertainment. It functions as a fundamental, and yes, often unacknowledged, check on official power. It's the system that keeps the conversation honest and ensures that the moral dimension is never completely forgotten.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a longer, audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description.
If you enjoyed this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.